You can have shame bound to your needs. If as a child you were shamed for any one of these needs, food needs, clothing needs, shelter needs, physical nurturing needs. Physical nurturing is about getting hugging and things like that. Emotional nurturing. If you got shamed for requesting emotional nurturing, in other words, if you had gone to your parent and asked for time, attention, or direction from them and they shamed you for asking for that kind of help, you can have a shame emotional nurturing bind. A shame medical bind. That means whenever you need to go to the doctor, you don't go, because when you do, you have a massive shame attack about that kind of self-care. A shame dental bind. A shame sexual bind. You have shame bound to the experience of being sexual because somebody shamed you about your sexual issues. You can have a shame financial bind. My financial planner is actually in the audience. I had a massive, she's sitting over there. She's a wonderful lady. She's in that turquoise shirt over there in the front row. Bony finger her and let her have a shame attack. She's also a therapist, interestingly enough. Thank God I found something like that. By accident, I got referred to her for my shame financial bind. What was going on with me is I had shame around issues of money. And what would happen is whenever I tried to face the issues around handling some money I had, I have a massive shame attack and get immobilized and do nothing about it. In order to overcome this, I had to go to Marion and have her teach me how to handle money and force myself, despite all these shame attacks, to go to her office and talk to her about it anyway. Going to her office, first of all, you can ask my administrative assistant there, Barbara, sitting in the second row right there. It took me 6 months to make myself go see Marion. It was awful. It was worse than going to the dentist. You know how you resist going to the dentist, put it off for a year or so until you really have problems? I put that off for 6 months knowing I had to do that as part of my issues of recovery, going and breaking that bind with money. Finally, I went, and then it took me, I don't know how long before. I think it took us a year, not because she was not doing something, but because I was dragging my feet about paying attention to it and learning what I was doing. I just went to her office a few days ago. I got all these financial statements back, and I couldn't read them. My brain just went on blank. It's like I knew she had told me about all this stuff. Had to make an appointment, go into her office, say, Marion, I can't think what this all means. Would you go over it? What does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? What does that? My brain kept going. She'd tell me, I go, oh yeah, you've told me that before. She'd go, Trying to make myself understand finances and money and be responsible for it. Part of that was my having the right to have abundance, to embrace it, to work with it, to use it, to make it work for me, to have it in the first place. Kids can get shamed around their issues around money and their right to abundance and get into shame financial binds then in their disease. It means whenever they have to deal with it, they have a shame attack. Now what all this means, you can also have shame bound to your issues of wants. Wants are preferences. They're what bring joy to your life. They're wonderful experiences. It don't have very much to do with your needs at all. It just has to do with what brings you joy. You can have shame bound to your wants. Now, why I bring this up is because wherever you have shame bound to any one of these first core symptoms, until you break the shame bind, you will not recover from that symptom. That's how important it is to understand this issue of carried shame, shame binds, shame attacks. Shame binds are set up in childhood when a child gets shamed for any one of these experiences. Shame for self-valuing, shame for setting boundaries, shame for any part of their reality, shame for their needs or shame for their wants. Shame binds are set up, which means whenever today as an adult they try to work through their illnesses, as they're doing that, they have massive shame attacks around each one of these issues. What happens when you have a shame attack and sink into that pit of worthlessness? What happens to you when that happens? What does your behavior look like? Two things I know. You go silent and your brain shuts down, don't you? Now, how can you work against a symptom if you're standing there? I can't tell you how many times somebody come up and they touch me and I didn't know them. And I know that I had to say to this person, please don't touch me. I don't know you well enough for you to be touching me. Well, what would I do if I said that to that person? What would I be in an act of doing? Setting a physical boundary with another human being. What I'd do is I'd stand there and I'd be knowing I had to do it, but the minute I opened my mouth, made public my need for a boundary with this person, as soon as it flew out of my mouth, I'd have a massive shame attack. Now what would happen is I knew that that was going to happen if I opened my mouth, so what did it do? It silenced me, and I'd stand there letting this person touch me when I didn't want him touching me. And what would I be in? My disease. And I'd stay there until I finally would get into so much pain about not protecting myself, because I was aware that I needed to learn to set boundaries, that I'd turn and I'd say, please don't touch me. I don't know you well enough to touch me. I'd go push myself through the shame attack and up and out of it and then go on. That's the work of recovery. Most of the work of recovery around the primary symptoms are about breaking up those spines and teaching yourself how to experience each one of these issues normally. Okay? Does anybody have any questions about this issue of shame binds, shame attacks, and how it immobilizes you within your own disease? You all understanding that? It's critical to understand that. You have shame bonds wherever you carry shame for somebody else who abused you around these issues. That's the issue of too much carried shame from another human being, too much of somebody else's shame. But what about the person who has too little of their own? How does that affect these symptoms? Well, it looks like this, if I can find my glasses. I don't have these problems as much as I have those others, so I have to kind of really think about it. Sometimes I wish I did, though. These people are more comfortable because they don't know their poop smells. They don't know how they bother other people. It never occurs to them, so they're not in very much pain. Have you ever noticed that about these people who have too little of their own shame? Have you ever noticed that? No. Okay, a person who lacks shame around their sense of value is a person who basically what it means is they don't have enough shame to set limits on their own self-valuing, so that they're constantly giving themselves permission to feel better than, judge others, and look down upon others as somehow worth less than they are. When they lack too little shame, they don't have an ability to set limits on their reality. You know, it's the shame that sets limits on a person's reality. So they're about offending other people's boundaries because they lack the shame to let them know how they're impacting other people with their own reality. They're boundaryless. They also don't have enough shame to sensitize themselves to the reality of how their reality is being handled by the environment, so they can't put limits on their own reality and can't see the effect of their reality on others. And they can't see that they need to put limits on their own issues of needs and wants. And they're about getting all their needs and all their wants taken care of at the expense of other people. They take from others. And again, when you see this lacking enough of their own shame, basically what it means around these symptoms is they can't put any limits here. And they're about taking value from others, punching through other people's boundaries without seeing the effect. Unable to see the effect of their reality on others. Again, these two are tied together. Boundaries and reality are tied together. And unable to set limits on their own issues of needing and wanting, and they literally take from others. This is the disease in the other extreme. One is too little of their own shame. The other experiences too much of somebody else's, and it sets up the disease. It's really rather profound. Now, I want to go into the third phase of this lecture and that's on shame and relationship issues. And how shame affects us in our relationships with others. We basically learn how to be in relationships with other people. We learn how to do that in our original experience with our major caregivers, usually our parents. Our parents teach us two things about being in relationships with others. They teach us who we are and what to expect from others, both of which affect how we do relationships. When we come from dysfunctional parents, and basically when you look at dysfunctional systems or dysfunctional parents, what you're looking at is two addict codependents busy trying to have a relationship with each other, which is highly addicted and certainly not conducive to helping kids grow up. What happens with the codependent is that we are taught two things about who we are. usually we ride in one position or the other. We are taught that we are better than others, or we are taught that we are worth less than other people. That's what we're taught. That same issue coming up again. The second thing that we are taught in these dysfunctional systems is what to expect from others. Basically, how that pans out as I see it is that we are taught to expect others to abandon us, or on the other hand, we are taught to expect others to drain us dry and use us. Abandon us, not be there for us, or use us. We generally are taught in these dysfunctional systems one extreme or the other, which is really crazy making. Generally speaking, people that are in the experience of profoundly being used and drained by their parents are also taught to be better than. And people that are abandoned by their parents, not connected with their parents, are taught that they're worthless. You see those two dynamics going like that. So what happens to people is when they enter relationships with others, they're entering it from a position of disorder. They enter it expecting their mate to abandon them or their mate to engulf them. They enter it from a position of feeling worthless or a position of feeling better than. All four of those issues will prevent relationships from working. And they get taught this in their family of origin. Because of the shaming that goes on in dysfunctional families, if a child is shamed and taught to feel worthless, that person will enter a relationship feeling defective. If, on the other hand, the person receives a lot of empowering abuse, they will enter the relationship from the better than experience, and both will hamper how they deal with people they're trying to be in relationship with. In functional families, what we see is that both parents are filled with enough worth, they're in touch with their perfect imperfection, and they teach their children that everyone has equal value and everyone is equally fallible. So that people coming from functional systems do not enter relationships feeling one down or feeling one up. They enter relationships feeling equal, and they have the ability to love themselves and love another human being. Love being defined as holding somebody in warm personal regard and being concerned about what happens to that other person. In functional systems, too, kids are taught to be responsible for their own issues of self-care. And they get taught in a functional system to expect others to be supportive, but not at the other's expense. They are taught to take responsibility for their own issues of self-care, taught that others will support them in that, but it isn't the other person's responsibility. So in functional systems, they produce people that enter relationships with a sense of worth and a sense of being responsible for their own issues of self-care. Not so when you've been raised in a dysfunctional system, as I said before. What happens to us is that we enter relationships with skewed dynamics going on. And what these dynamics produce for us are what I call power struggles, which brings up another interesting dynamic, and around shame too. And that's one thing I noticed too, is that there are three bedfellows that most people don't recognize are interrelated. They're value, power, and abundance. This is something else to recognize, especially as you try to be in a relationship with somebody else. Marion and I were talking about this the other day, because she handles money, and guess what money does for people? Huh? Let me show you how this works. It's very interesting. Now, for money, I'm gonna talk about money as being abundance. There's other things you can have an abundance. But essentially what we're talking about in this culture is money. What I will tell you is that as a person values themselves, they also increase their sense of power. As you devalue yourself, you disempower yourself. As you value yourself and treat yourself as though you are worthwhile, you automatically raise your sense of power. Have you noticed that? I noticed this very dramatically in my life. Probably it's because I've come from that disempowering position. I have noticed that As I learn to see myself more and more as a valuable person, I won't put up with abuse. It makes me angry when somebody abuses me now, whereas before I didn't even notice it or really care about it. Now, when somebody treats me as though I'm worthless, guess what comes up for me? Anger, because they are treating me as though I'm worthless. What does the emotion anger give you? What's the get? Yeah. Anger brings you a sense of power. And as you value yourself, what will happen is if somebody treats you as worthless, your anger will rise and automatically your sense of power will rise. Now the third dynamic here is this issue of abundance. One of the things I noticed that as I worked on feeling like a worthwhile person and learned how to be angry when people were abusive to me, I empowered myself, and the more I did both of these, the more abundance I began to experience. You cannot expect to have abundance in your life if you're constantly devaluing yourself and failing to own your own power. These three go together. Another interesting dynamic when you watch people is that many people who are codependent try to heal the wound of being worthless by gathering money. Because everybody knows that, don't we? What do we do in this culture? We look at wealthy people somehow as being more worthwhile than a poor person. How many people get into that? Yeah, it's like if somebody has money, they're more valuable. That's a lot of hooey, you know. Just because somebody has money does not increase their sense of value, but we do that. And because that happens in our culture, what some people do to try to heal the wound of their own worthlessness is get a whole bunch of money. One of the interesting dynamics that goes on with that, however, is that as the person gets money, they don't value the money. The money means nothing to them, and they lose it easily and get it easily, and lose it easily and get it easily, because they can't hang on to it, because they don't value themselves enough to value their own money. But they're about getting that to try to heal this initial sense of worthlessness that has come about by being shamed originally in their family of origin. Another people try to heal this value wound by getting powerful. Did you ever notice that? That a lot of people don't go after money, they go after being powerful. How do they principally do that? If they're not going after the money, where do they seek the power? Where? Teaching? Well, yeah, they can teach and they can have power over their students, can't they? Overachieving. Overachieving is generally about trying to get the abundance to bring you the power, to bring you the value. Where people really get into these issues around power is basically in personal relationships. Yes, it's who's going to have the power, and what do they struggle over? What's the big fight over? The struggle is usually around whose reality is going to prevail. This is crazy. It's all about, in a very crooked way, trying to heal the dynamics that you can't heal that way. You can't heal shame issues by struggling by getting money. You can't heal the shame issues by struggling for power. The only way you can heal the shame issues is by learning how to value yourself and work through the shame. That's the only way you can heal the shame. You can't heal it by getting a bunch of power, and you can't heal it by getting a bunch of abundance. It won't work. You can see this happening all the time, not working. People struggle in their relationships really, how can I explain this so it's understandable? They struggle for power in order to control reality so that they can feel safe. In other words, what people get into is they have their reality, and the reality conflicts with their partner, so they fight about whose reality is going to prevail. They get in a power struggle or an issue for control, and whoever wins, in other words, whoever gets to be right, or whoever's reality prevail, that person feels safe. That person feels like they have the value and like they're a winner because they got to have it. And also something else happens is they get to have the reality and prevail and be right. Their sense of value goes up so they can feel okay about themselves. Most of these power struggles aren't really power struggles as much as they are struggles for value. because the person cannot do the work of inherently valuing themselves within. They try to get their partner to value them by letting them win in situations and have their reality prevail. This is screwy. It's just totally screwy. You know, functional people don't do that. They don't have to do that. They don't even want to do it. Because nobody wins, do they? Have you ever noticed that in a relationship, nobody wins? What happens to the person who loses? What happens to the person that loses the power struggle? They do a little thing called getting even. You've ever noticed that whenever you lose, you always sneak around the bushes and get even? It's kind of like your partner notices somewhere down the line that there's blood dripping on their feet, their own. And they can't figure out how you did it, but that other person who lost that fight last week got even this week by doing something sneaky. If they can't win in the relationship, they go around the bushes and win in a real sneaky way so that the other person doesn't win. If there's a winner, there's always a loser. If there's a loser, there's two losers. Nobody wins. What has to happen in relationships is that the people who are struggling for the power and control and reality to prevail, that whole issue, they have to stop the power struggle, because that's not how you get the value. That's not how you get the value. That's not how you get safety. That's not how you win and are comfortable. What you have to do is work through your issues of shame so that you properly value yourself.